This is an incredibly influential film.
Absolutely. Every little moment works perfectly. It only gets better each time you see it.
Hidey-ho!
It is the definition of filmmaking at its best.
And it just lights up the screen. It kind of blows all the competition away. It's essential.
I suppose you realize this is private property.
I think the experience of watching A Hard Day's Night now, we have to remember, is so very different than the people who saw it in 1964, many of whom had never seen these guys before.
No, but they knew to scream.
They knew to scream, that's right, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that that's one of those odd phenomena that doesn't come around very often. Girls, primarily, were screaming as if the Beatles were in their theater. And when they first appear in that opening shot, they went nuts. And there's a loose, freewheeling quality to it that is still absolutely fresh to this day.
It was shot in that semi-documentary style by Gilbert Taylor, who shot Dr. Strangelove and Star Wars.
Yeah.
So you still have a sense that you're watching a documentary on this fabulous
young lads
from Liverpool, right? These Liverpudlians.
So I think it was a really inspired choice getting Richard Lester, who had done the running, jumping,
and standing still film.
Yes, okay.
And it was like a 15-minute short, but the Beatles loved it.
They loved it, and it had that kind of quality to it. The Beatles, one of the things that made them one of a kind, besides, you know, making the most amazing body of work that any artist has done, you know, I mean, alongside the greats, is that they didn't take themselves too seriously. And I read that when the Beatles first came to America, the press was ready to just bust them for being these long-haired kids that didn't know anything, and how dare they think they can conquer America. And they completely won over all of the press corps because they didn't take themselves at all seriously. They joked their way through the press conference, and by the end of it, everyone that was unconvinced was in love with the Beatles, and that absolutely comes through on the film.
Has success changed your life?
Yes. I'd like to keep Britain tidy.
Are you a mod or a rocker?
No, I'm a mocker.
Alan Owen wrote this movie to the extent that it's written. But the Beatles gave him a lot of credit because he came and spent weeks with them, traveling with them, and got to understand the things that made them what they are and the things that you're bringing up that the press sort of recognized. And so he got John Lennon's wit and the casual manner that Ringo Starr had and how he carried himself throughout the day.
And Paul's grandfather, who's very clean.
And Paul's very clean grandfather. So he got that, and so he gave them some lines, but they consistently felt like, oh, wow, this is exactly the kind of thing I would say, or I said it 6 weeks ago, and he has put it into the movie.
Yeah, I mean, the title, Hard Day's Night, came from Ringo. What he meant to say was a hard day's work, but it went all night long, so he said, oh, you know, it was a hard day's night, and that became the title of the movie, and then, of course, the theme song that was written...
After that?
Yes.
In a night.
In a night. And it's absolutely infectious, as every song is in the movie, and it's infectious filmmaking, too. It's aged incredibly well. It seems very contemporary still.
I am not surprised when it turns out that rock stars can act, because they're performing on stage. Sure. That is a performance. As I watch A Hard Day's Night, as I watch Help, I think if any one of those guys had wanted to be an actor, they probably would have succeeded.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that sets the Beatles apart from all other bands is that any one of them could run a show. All four of them were consummate entertainers, and they could take over a show and host it and crack jokes with the audience. And I think any one of them could be actors as well if they'd wanted to be. And I think that's one of the miracles of this movie.
Well, let's take a look at it. We'll talk more afterwards. Here it is from 1964, The Beatles in A Hard Day's Night. This is filmmaking at its best.
It's essential.
Looking back now, we see the Beatles as these stars who were destined for greatness, but that was not obvious at the time. There were plenty of flash-in-the-pan bands, and the thought was maybe the Beatles are one of these, so they all wanted to capitalize and make a movie before they faded to obscurity.
Right.
But they didn't want to be like Elvis. They didn't want to make those kinds of movies, and that is, I think, a big part of what works, that we didn't try and cast them in Hawaii, meeting girls, playing roles.
Right, in front of rear projection screens.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And very quickly they became bored with movies and always wanted to make something different. They tried to sort of recapture the magic with Help with Richard Lester, but it somehow seems a little older somehow, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's in color, maybe because they're getting a little used to stardom by it, but it doesn't have the freshness that Hard Day's Night has.
There's such innocence to them in Hard Day's Night, and I'm sure it's impossible to do in Help, right? I mean, by then, because they've lost some innocence, it's not necessarily tragic that that happens.
And Help is fun, too, and has great music, of course. But I think that you can see it, you can feel it immediately in Hard Day's Night. In that first shot where they're running, one of them takes just a complete header, and they get up laughing and
falls
continue running.
That's almost my favorite scene.
Yeah.
It's just, they're loving this.
They're loving it. It's kind of out of control, and they're having a blast with it. And so it's a moment in time, as well as being a really fun movie that is fun to this day. It captures a moment in time that was fleeting.
Yeah. I'm sorry I missed that time. Were you a Beatles fan?
I was. I had 3 older sisters, so they were Beatles fans, and I kind of got it out of proximity.
Yeah.
The albums were played relentlessly, and at first I was annoyed, and then, of course, every song dug its way into my brain, and I think they were one of the most influential artists to me. The fact that their worst album is pretty good.
Yeah,
it's the cover album where they kind of just had to contractually deliver an album, and they covered other people's songs. That's pretty good, and that's the worst album they made. Most of them are just slapped down great, beginning to end, and then they got off stage. They kicked ass, kicked ass, kicked ass, and then they said bye, and they each had solo careers. But the fact that they never let themselves stop pushing when they got successful, they were always pushing the boundaries of what the music could be, really impressed me.
Brad, thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Here's a look at what's coming up next week on The Essentials with Brad Bird. Cooper and Stanwyck in Ball of Fire from 1941.
Barbara Stanwyck is spicy in all the right ways, and having her next to Gary Cooper is a hilarious juxtaposition.
Oh, come on, give.
Gary Cooper's colleagues are great, Sakal, Henry Travers, but Dan Duryea and Dana Andrews anchor the rest of the supporting cast.
It's kind of like an urban Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs if everybody was a tough guy.
That's next Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for joining us for The Essentials.